people. Hello, welcome to the May 2025 edition of the Idaho Department of Labor's Labor Market Insights series. My name is Lindsay Trombley, and I'm the Public Information Specialist at the Idaho Department of Labor, as well as your host today. So today, labor economist Ryan Whitesides will be discussing Idaho's business startup data in 2024. We're also joined by a guest panelist today, Kyle Guelcher. Kyle is the director of the North Central Idaho Small Business Development Center at Lewis Clark State College in Lewiston, Idaho. Since 2020, Kyle's helped small businesses to launch, run, and grow through business consulting and coaching. Idaho SBDC offices work to support small businesses around Idaho and advance economic growth. Thanks for joining us today, Kyle. And with that, I'm just going to let you guys get started.
Thank you, Lindsay. Welcome, Kyle, and thank you for joining us once again. Kyle and I have been kind of researching some of this presentation material and content, and had some preparation building up to this moment, and so we're happy to share this with you. Kyle, how you doing today?
Good, Ryan. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. So we'll go ahead and start with some of the webinar objectives and what we're trying to accomplish with today's presentation to those who are viewing both live and on YouTube later on, where this will be posted. So some of the objectives we want to cover today, just to kind of preface this, is that we're going to highlight business startup activity with some data, as Lindsay had articulated earlier. There's also an accompanying article that will go with this particular presentation that will be due for release, I think tomorrow or sometime soon. So I wanted to mention that in follow up to what we're going to present. Also, we want to compare how Idaho's doing in regards to business startup activity relative to the nation, and then provide a clear picture of how startups, most importantly, figure into not only the viability of the business, but also those that they employ, and how employment and jobs are created. With Kyle's assistance, we're going to be talking about the Small Business Development Center and how it kind of ties into the big picture of business startup activity statewide. And he'll be able to kind of shed some light on that type of business activity and the successes that they're seeing with business startups and those that are behind that. So I'll let Kyle kind of take it away from this juncture, and he has some things to share. We'll kind of have a dialogue as we go, and really appreciate that, Kyle. The floor is yours.
Again, thank you very much, Ryan. So yes, I'm Kyle Guelcher. I'm the regional director for the North Central Idaho Small Business Development Center, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Idaho SBDC. So we are a United States Small Business Administration resource partner. We help small businesses across the entire state of Idaho with the following: no-cost business consulting and coaching, free or low-cost training programs, free market data, and assistance for all business types at all stages: entrepreneurs, startups, established businesses, side gigs, and so forth. May I have the next slide, please? We are an investment by the United States Small Business Administration, the state of Idaho, and host institutions of higher education. Next slide, please. And I want to talk a little bit about our work and the economic data that we'll provide. So our state office, regional directors, business consultants, and staff members work diligently to advance business success. Our work might include assisting with the following: business plans, buying a business, capital access, exporting, managing a business, marketing plans, social media, technology, and much more. The information we will review today relates directly to the services we provide that translates into the following economic data: sales growth, jobs created, capital raised, business starts, and more. Next slide, please.
Kyle, may I just ask you a question here?
Sure.
And it kind of is a precursor to some later conversation, but what types of new business incubation or mentorship programs exist for startups that SBDC currently assists with?
That's a good question, Ryan. Thank you. So one of the opportunities that we have is we have an Idaho accelerator, an incubator basically, that is in Nampa, Idaho. And there's also other resources available. So for example, the Idaho Apex Accelerator assists with government contracting, and there are other SBA resource partners that may be able to assist small businesses, such as SCORE, the Women's Business Center, and the Veterans Business Outreach Center.
So it seems like it's a pretty comprehensive program, not only for startups, but businesses that have been around for a while that want to expand. And then those that kind of need that mentorship and kind of those accelerator programs. So great program. I've done a little research on that as well. And we'll continue with kind of that conversation as we go.
Oh, very good. Yes. And what economic impact was created in 2024 with the Idaho SBDC's assistance? Sales growth of 58.8 million, jobs created of 467, jobs saved or retained of 164, capital raised of 31.6 million, and businesses started at 101.
So those are pretty significant quantitative results, kind of the output of what your organization does. Does the current perceived economic climate affect local entrepreneurship and kind of that motivation for people to start a business from your standpoint?
It does. And in some, since about 2022, we've seen a pretty marked increase in the number of clients that our office has supported. And that just shows that our services are needed to assist with entrepreneurship and small businesses in Idaho. And as far as the economic climate, regardless of the climate, entrepreneurs continually face challenges such as marketing, competition, cash flow, scaling, those sorts of things. And our office, we can assist with those topics to support small businesses.
Excellent.
What types of businesses were assisted in 2024? We assisted 62% of businesses that were already in business, otherwise established businesses. 38% were not yet in business, and 58% were rural.
A couple of those statistics kind of stand out to me. The 40% share almost that were not yet in business, that were kind of fledgling, trying to get off the ground. That's pretty significant. It sounds like you do assist also incumbent businesses that have already been around for a while, but the biggest takeaway on this statistic would be that almost 60% of the businesses you helped were rural. In a way that does make sense, because about 35 out of 44 counties in Idaho are rural counties. And it kind of dovetails into what our next webinar topic's going to be next month for the Idaho Department of Labor, because we'll delve into more of the rural profile. And business is a big part of that, business and commerce, employment, and kind of where you fall in to the equation as well, Kyle. So that's kind of a significant statistic to us, and timely as well, since rural business and the bulk of the state is rural. It's pretty significant to how you'll impact business in Idaho overall. And I just do have a question kind of to go off of that. At what point kind of in the business startup process can SBDC assist, or kind of to rephrase that, what's kind of the optimum time a prospective or new business startup can have your organization become involved? Kind of at what point in their business development can you get involved?
Again, it's a good question. And at any point during the business life cycle, we can assist. It's best if small business owners and entrepreneurs and startups come to us early in the process. An experienced business consultant will be able to help address challenges or issues, and be able to provide resources and connections to help that entrepreneur make informed decisions and navigate small business ownership with better confidence.
All right, that's good. Kind of lends some insight onto that whole business cycle and kind of where that falls in.
For industry, so which industries did we assist in 2024? 22% included other services, and other services includes auto repair shops, computer repair, salons, laundromats, pet care, not including veterinary services. It also included 17% of retail trade, 10% of construction, and we also assisted other industries such as agriculture, manufacturing, professional services, and more.
Thank you for describing what other services is. Sometimes that's a nebulous thing that we look at too. What does that entail? What industries are those, or what occupations? So thank you for articulating that.
Yes. And what are we seeing in 2025? So in the first few months, 60% are already in business. For the industries, it included, again, other services, retail, trade, professional services, and construction. And 50% of our traffic included businesses that were aged 4 years or more.
I have something kind of to ask you about, Kyle, along these lines. Regardless of the industry, how would one get a business off the ground through SBDC services? Say, for example, someone's had a hobby business for a while and they want to turn it into a profitable venture. Are you able to assist with that?
Yes, we are. And I believe at the close of the presentation, the slide will have our contact information for folks that are interested in our services. But basically, meeting with an SBDC business consultant is a good positive first step. A business consultant will be able to assist with evaluating the feasibility of the business, strategic planning, and basically help guide through the entrepreneurial journey. And it is challenging to start a small business. So please take advantage of the services that we have.
And they are statewide, is that correct? In various regions spread through the state?
Yes. So just a moment ago, we were talking about a fair percentage of the folks we assist with are rural, but we certainly help folks in the more metropolitan areas as well. And we have offices all across the state, so we can assist entrepreneurs regardless of their location.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to kind of, I appreciate that, Kyle. That kind of is a nice kind of preface to what we'll talk about with the actual data itself. And that's kind of where we want to start off here. So to the audience, if you'll please hang with me on these. There's a lot of slides that have infographics and charts on them, but it will kind of paint a picture of where we're at as far as where the statistics come from, where we're going with those, how we use the data, and how Idaho's doing, what we can extrapolate from that. I will mention kind of a caveat with the data from this research. It's for new private establishments or businesses, which from here on out, we're just going to refer to new private establishments as business startups, kind of in short, so you'll know what we're talking about. And that would be business startups of any and all sizes that can have any number of employees. So that's where this data is from. And it's particularly from the BLS that we use data for and the U.S. Census Bureau. We're not just exclusively talking about small businesses per se. Small businesses as defined by the BLS would be businesses of 100 employees or less. So again, that'll just be businesses of all sizes that we're talking about as far as startups are concerned. So with the BLS data, we primarily use what's called business employment dynamics data for the sake of this webinar and this data. Incidentally, the Department of Labor does use a business employment data update. It's kind of a scan that we do on a monthly basis. It's a short article that we'll put on our lmi.idaho.gov website. And the bulk of the data for this webinar is going to be BLS and then a little bit from the U.S. Census Bureau. So what business employment dynamics data does is it measures jobs gained at the business opening or expansion of the business. And then it also measures jobs lost at closing or contracting establishments. So businesses that are shrinking, they don't necessarily have to be completely closed, but it will take kind of a gross and a net of businesses open minus those that are closing and give us some of the statistics that we need. And then if we're looking at Census Bureau data, the key to this one would be business formation statistics. So business applications data from initial business applications that are filed by an establishment and have a high propensity to turn over into an actual business with employees that they've hired. And these business application statistics that we're using is kind of going to offer a little bit of entrepreneurial activity insight. Also, we're talking about establishment births and deaths. So establishment births and firm startups, they're going to track new business formations that materialize into not just a concept of a business. That's what an application is typically, but it's going to measure what materialized into an actual launch of a business. And it takes into account emerging industry and business trends as well. And then also with firm startups and shutdowns, excuse me, let me go back to the last slide. So for businesses with firm startups and shutdowns, I kind of want to make a distinction here. A firm startup is a larger firm. It's a new company forming for the first time. And from there, expansion can occur into smaller establishments. So they can kind of branch out and have kind of like retail locations or banks, for example. A new business location, whether it's part of a startup or an existing firm expanding, is an establishment birth. So kind of want to make that distinction, what an establishment birth is versus a firm startup. Here in Idaho Falls, there's a new retailer coming in. They have a nationwide headquarters. They also, they were established decades ago, and they have a home office and an original store. So that would be an example of a firm startup decades ago when that actual business for the first location started up. And now they're expanding nationwide. So that would be an example of an establishment birth of that expanding retail store location, to kind of give you an idea of how that works. So into the statistics themselves, we're talking about employment from new startups less than a year old, again, comparing nationwide statistics versus Idaho. And so every year, an Idaho Department of Labor economist is going to do an annual business startup scan as data is released either by the BLS or census, mostly BLS data. And the data that is going to be synthesized, and we've kind of put it in a graphic form here for you. And some of the highlights from the most recent business startup scan would be that Idaho saw recent growth in both startup jobs and new business applications for 2024. So that's the most recent data available. It's a full year of data for 2024. And again, to reiterate, these slides will just cover data from new private establishments less than a year old. And we'll be referring to them as startups of all sizes of employment. And you'll see that a positive byproduct of startups opening would be the jobs that they create and the employment overall. So this line graph plots employment of new startups in Idaho and the U.S. from 94 to 2024. And despite a slight employment decrease in 2023, you do see the Idaho job growth from new startups, which is that green line there, is again on the rise in 2024. And nationwide job growth from startups, the blue line there would have netted a 15% decline during the 20-year span. Idaho's doing pretty good relative to the nation as far as employment from new startups is concerned. There's a healthy state of job growth in the state currently from startups, especially over the last 14 years when the greatest growth occurred. You can kind of see that spike from 2017 to 2024 with a little hiccup in between. But startups do account for a smaller share of private jobs back in the 90s than they do now. So total employment now for the statewide total employment from startups grew from 15,000 jobs in 1994 to pretty staggering 27,000 jobs in 2024. So we've come a long way as far as business startups are concerned in the job creation. And it's a pretty robust accomplishment. That's an 80% net climb since 94 in startup employment. And so this graph will show the change in quantity or level of employees on average per new startup in Idaho and the U.S. over time. In 2022, Idaho experienced the first increase since 2014 in the quantity of workers per each new startup. And nationally, the trend, on the other hand, would have been sort of flat, as you can see there. But for both Idaho and the U.S., the average number of jobs per new startup has again increased in 2024. And that's despite the overall decrease in startups themselves. And so the first consecutive year increase in 16 years occurred between 2022, 23, and 24. For our state, there's been a total employment increase of over 15,000 workers, as I mentioned, since 2010. And the peak was in 2010, or excuse me, in 2001, where Idaho startups employed an average of around 6 employees, while nationwide the average was around 7 employees employed in startups. So since 2006, the state hasn't been able to average more than 6 workers per startup formed. The challenge since that peak in 2001 for Idaho has been that a lot of fledgling businesses, new startups, have become increasingly too small in terms of the quantity of workers they've been able to afford hiring. On the other hand, they may require fewer workers due to innovations in technology like automation. So it just depends on the industry in that regard. The state's done a pretty good job to reverse downturns in new startup employment by offering tax incentives and workforce development programs to encourage hiring for new businesses. So now we're talking about employment from new startups as a share of total private establishments, kind of on a percentage basis. So this one will chart the share of employment from new startups out of total private establishments over time. So the highest point in 2001 was over 5% of total employment, showing Idaho employment over 5%. So this was from newly formed establishments, again, less than a year old. And even though new startup growth has accelerated since then, the share of startup growth hasn't recovered back to the level it was back in 2001. In 2022, we had the highest new establishment employment since 2007, but Idaho's startup share increased to only about 3.5% in 2023, and it's remained flat since. The total private establishment employment does continue to increase year over year, both nationally and statewide, but it's still kind of a wild card to see if in the near future the share of employment from new startups will keep pace, because Idaho does continue to outpace the nation in the share of new startups out of total employment. So that's a positive sign relative to 49 other states. Well, Idaho would factor into that too, all 50 states. So you see a recent drop off on the line graph here. In this case, it's a good thing when we're talking about startup failure rate. The most recent data we have available for this one is 2023 rather than 2024, since we have a 1-year lag in startup failure rate data. There's a lot of fits and starts, peaks and valleys on this particular graph for Idaho. When you look at that pattern, it's kind of inconsistent when you're kind of trying to get a gauge on startup failure rate. But between 94 and 2022, despite Idaho having historically higher than average entrepreneurship rates than the nation, the state also experienced higher than average startup failure rates. And I'll talk a little bit more in a slide here in a moment about what entrepreneurship rate is, because that's worth having a discussion about as well. In 2022, startup failure rates were 31 out of 100 businesses for Idaho, and then 24 out of 100 businesses for the U.S. had failed. So that was a 20-year high back in 2022. But throughout the 20-year span here, startup failure rates in the state have kind of mirrored national rates. But in 2023, you can see that average startup failure rates made a more of a favorable decline to about 31 out of 100 businesses failing the year previous in 2022 to 26 out of 100 in 2023. So doing a little bit better there nationally and in Idaho. And it kind of follows the business cycle too. It's kind of what we can attribute that to. But I think that's a positive sign that startup success in Idaho and the U.S. is headed in the right direction, at least from what we can see. We want to check 2024 data later next year, going into that lag period to see if there's any spike in failure rates. But we're trending toward kind of more startup success than failure. So that's kind of the bottom line of this particular graphic. Idaho's economy is pretty resilient with steady job growth and consumer confidence to support new businesses. And also it takes the confidence of the business owner themselves, not just the consumer. So they kind of have to gauge that as well. And we help with that at the Idaho Department of Labor if they want to forecast that or kind of see historically what's been happening in certain regions and statewide. Kyle had mentioned adoption of business incubator and mentorship programs. That's provided additional resources to prevent startup failure and better strategies for entrepreneurs to enter markets in that particular instance.
Ryan, if I may interject for a moment, are there some incentives that are available through the state of Idaho or other resources that you're aware of that would assist businesses?
That's a really good question, Kyle. Sorry. We could actually we could do another spin-off topic on this, another webinar on it altogether. Idaho Commerce, kind of want to put a plug in for Idaho Commerce because on their website, commerce.idaho.gov, under incentives and financing, there's several examples of kind of what those incentives would entail. And there, one example is the Idaho tax reimbursement incentive that's there on their site. Lindsay, if you have that web link in the chat, you're welcome to post that on kind of on the Zoom chat there. And if there's any Idaho Commerce reps out there in our audience, they can type in the chat too of other incentives that they offer. I don't want to steal too much of their thunder, but I do want to mention that those resources are there. In addition to SBDC, Idaho Commerce has them as well. And basically with the tax reimbursement incentive that's listed there on their site, I'm showing that it's an incentive to startups that features a tax credit of up to 30% for up to 15 years on new state tax revenues that are generated by that business that either wants to expand or relocate here into Idaho. And that there are qualifying jobs that kind of factor into that as well. But they are designed for job creation. And it goes back to increasing firm startups and establishment bursts in the state. So hopefully that answers it there. In addition to the resulting jobs that are created, other economic indicators in Idaho and nationally include new startup growth of businesses that have operated less than a year. And this chart will show between 94 and 2024, Idaho's annual number of new private establishments grew from only 3,300 jobs to 8,600 3,300 startups to 8,600 startups. So this was a significant increase, about 163%, 3% annualized. And that was despite a decrease that we had in the last couple of years that you can see there charted. And by comparison, the number of new startups nationwide grew at over 75% over that 20-year span as well. It's kind of a 2% annual basis for new startups. So it'll be interesting to kind of see how that bears out with next year's business startup scan. Between 2020 and 2022, Idaho experienced a 55% increase in new private sector startups. So that was nearly a 4,000 startup jump between just 2020 and 2022. But the past 2 years have seen more of a decrease, about 16%. So we're back to about 8,600 startups in 2024 that were established. This is in part from the normalizing kind of post-pandemic. There was a big surge in business stimulus cash flow. Kyle, you probably saw that when you started there in 2020, that surge. And it can be for various reasons too. High interest rates are kind of where we have that drop in the graph there. That factors into it. Business consumer spending will slow down, obviously, when interest rates are high. And then so does business investment and expansion. But the quantity of 2024 startups in Idaho is still higher than it was in 2021. That's when the state had that rapid growth surge, more unprecedented than anything with the growth in new startups. So here's, I kind of mentioned this earlier with what entrepreneurship rate is. To define it, it's new startups per 1,000 labor force participants. Since 2012, Idaho's outpaced the nation in entrepreneurship rate. And in 2010, the state and nation were basically equal at about 4 new startups per 1,000 labor force participants. And then you see a peak there in 2022 with nearly 11 startups in Idaho for every 1,000 labor force participants. Nationally, it was only about 7 startups for every 1,000 Americans in the labor force, and that was in 2022. But since then, you can see here that startup growths continue to trend downward, both in Idaho and the U.S., with just over 8 startups per 1,000 labor force participants. So the entrepreneurship rate is dipping a little bit. And, you know, in Idaho, we're just under 6 startups currently per 1,000 labor force participants. Actually, we're at about just over 8. And then the nation is at about 6. And the share of new startups out of total number of private establishments has also kind of tracked both for the state and nation, as you can see on the chart here. Like the 8 years between the mid-90s and early to mid-2000s, the share of startups out of total private establishments in Idaho is closely matched that of the nation. But with economic recovery after 2013 from the recession, Idaho separated itself in more of a positive direction from the nation in the percentage of new startups out of all existing private establishments. So this is kind of an interesting one. Kind of gives you the ratio of startups out of total private businesses, an important statistic. Starting in 2022 until 2024, both nationally and in Idaho, we did see a declining percentage of new startups out of total private businesses. And the percentage of startups that were in business for a year or less declined during that 2-year span. And then if we look back again at 94 to 2004, the percentage of new startups hovered at around 10 to 11% in that ratio, both in Idaho and the U.S. And that was leading up to that recession. Idaho's share grew to around 12%, and then it plummeted to about 7% in 2010. And we know the kind of the reasoning behind that. And then nationwide, it bottomed out at 8% the same year. So there was some reluctance for startups at that time, naturally. And then by 2022, roughly 16 out of every 100 private establishments in Idaho were less than a year old, compared to 12 out of 100 nationally. fast forwarding to 2024, the rate has decreased in Idaho to about 14 new establishments to every 100 private establishments in total, but it's better than 11 for 11 out of 100 establishments nationwide, and still higher than it was 20 years ago. So there are subtle downturns in the share of new startups that occurred from 2017 to 2020, but it's still rebounded in subsequent years. So that is still a possibility. All right, so there's an alternative startup growth measure that I've chosen to use for this particular webinar, and also for the write-up, the analysis article that goes with it. Business applications and formations are kind of what we're looking at in comparison here. And I wanted to again reiterate kind of the key distinction with firm startups. Those are new companies, again, forming for the first time, which we've kind of discussed up to this point. And then establishment bursts, that's kind of the new concept here that I'll introduce to you. New business locations, whether they're part of a startup or an existing firm expanding. I used that example earlier of the retailer that's expanding but had a home office, an original store elsewhere, kind of the mothership of that particular establishment, and that would be the firm. The data from the U.S. Census Bureau, we took the business formation statistics that tracks new monthly business applications, and we can compare this against new business formations and bursts in the U.S. and Idaho over time. So I kind of wanted to take that comparison real quick. Idaho establishment bursts in this case are calculated estimates for the last 2 quarters of 2024. And so for this chart and the next one, they show the correlation between seasonally adjusted establishment births. Those are the new startups and expansions of existing establishments, compared with business applications. So the business applications there on the dotted line, the blue dotted line there, and establishment births there in green. It's this is based on kind of that conversation we had earlier with Kyle, where there's a conceptual phase to a business where it's on the drawing board. It hasn't been set up yet. Whether or not they proceed, that entrepreneur is going to make that decision, kind of the moment of truth. And so this is kind of showing how a conceptual new business is actually whether or not it's going to materialize into a new establishment birth the following year after the application was submitted. So in Idaho, from 2016 to 2021, business applications depicted here by that dotted line increased at a higher level than ever. And you would expect this had something to do with establishment bursts increasing dramatically at the same time or a year previous. But business applications have kind of continued on an upward trajectory, as you can see in Idaho, since 2020. And that resulted in new establishment bursts that some may have not yet materialized. And there's kind of that decline in 2023 where you see the crossing of the 2 lines there. And in 2024, Idaho new business applications were being filled at a seasonally adjusted 2,800 new business startups a month, up 7% from 2023. And that is a significant increase from the pre-pandemic year of 2019, a 36% gain in new business applications. So what does that mean as far as new business applications filed over the month? There's nationwide, you'll see this in the next slide, but 392,000 new business applications were filed per month in 2024. That sounds like a lot, but it is down 14% from 2023, but still a 25% increase from 2019 as far as the nation's concerned. So what can we conclude from this particular analysis of these 2 data points? So in Idaho and the U.S., more people than ever are submitting business applications still. So what's in question is whether they'll follow through to the actual business startup, and whether it will materialize into a business with employees. That's kind of the challenge to be determined. And it's likely that some Idaho new business application increases since 2020 are attributed to that early stimulus capital, like low interest SBA loans that we've heard a lot about. And then entrepreneurs were more willing to take a risk to launch a new business if they had that startup capital from the SBA. And then other factors, Idaho's had some sudden population increases in the last few years that have created more of an enhanced consumer base and new business optimism as the population increases. And also the state of Idaho does offer a relatively more affordable environment to launch a new business compared to like some of the bordering states. It does have relatively lower cost of living and cheaper taxes to foster a business owner starting a business or expanding into the state. Looking kind of a continuance of the last slide, but on a national level, during the 2010s, applications for all businesses in the U.S. rose from a seasonally adjusted average of 200,000 new business startups a month. New business applications for startups per month to over 300,000 new applications per month. And with that premise, is that in Idaho and the U.S., more people than ever, again, are submitting business applications. They're braving the storm. They're wanting to kind of put their business out there, at least thinking about it. But as far as follow through to actual startup, that's kind of yet to be seen. That's the challenge in the climate that we're in. And new business application growth has been less consistent for the U.S. A drop in new business applications between 2022 and 2024. U.S. establishment births are also, in this case, estimates for the last 2 quarters of 2024. I wanted to make that note. And private establishment births have also tailed off since 2022 nationally. And so if we kind of analyze the factors in the decline of business applications, it could be a number of things, including expensive borrowing costs. Of course, we talked about interest rates, economic uncertainty, kind of people's pulse on how they think their own business will do in the near and short term. And that can either encourage or discourage a startup that's reliant on loans and venture capital and those types of terms of getting their business off the ground. And there's been also a lot of post-pandemic correction of the business cycle in business formation rates and things like that. But persistent inflation is going to continue to challenge new business optimism and viability. Because if your goods and services and wages are elevated, that does de-incentivize you in a way. But some entrepreneurs are bold and they'll just power through and start their business and take that risk. So let me summarize kind of what we've been talking here about. Hopefully you've garnered some good information, and hopefully hopefully you'll have some questions for us both in this webinar, but we will leave our contact information if you have some kind of one-off questions or data requests that we can help you with, and also Kyle's services. So the takeaways as far as what we presented here today, our business development through SBDC services are robust and strong throughout all Idaho regions. People are still utilizing their services, and probably more so than they have been. And I appreciate the data that Kyle shared in kind of reinforcing the need for SBDC. It's backed by the SBA and the services that they offer to continue to encourage growth for startups throughout the state. And total employment for business startups is again on the rise in Idaho. That's the good news. Some of the good news of this particular presentation, as well as business startup failures are decreasing in the state. So seeing that success in the turnover in businesses actually starting up and avoiding failure the next year. So that's an encouraging sign as well, and a signal that's kind of hard to put our finger on because it does change from year to year. But business startup failures have been on the decline rather, since 2023. And then also encouraging sign that total startup businesses are higher than they've ever been. However, total startups are down in Idaho since 2024. But still, since 94, there's that growth in business startups, consumer confidence, as well as the confidence of prospective business owners is higher than it's ever been. And new business applications continue to trend upward for the state. So that's kind of a big takeaway as well from our census data. People are still encouraged by starting a business. They're excited about it. The entrepreneurial spirit is alive and well in the state, and it does continue to trend upward for the state. Nationwide, kind of a different story on business applications. So yeah, those are kind of the takeaways and key conclusions of this particular webinar. I do have a bonus slide I want to share with you based on some of the time we have available. Speaking of good news, we'll put this information up here in a moment, but I do want to mention some props and accolades to some Idaho cities who've shown up in the rankings as far as fostering startup environments that are favorable. And they base these rankings on growth, resources, and costs for small cities around the nation. That last bullet point, it's showing Coeur d'Alene. So Kyle's neck of the woods is doing a great job as far as being ranked as one of the top cities to start a business. Post Falls is kind of up in that area too, but you see a lot of Southwest Idaho small communities that are on that list as far as nationally favorable cities to start a business in. Post Falls is ranked the highest among Idaho cities at number 11. So north central Idaho, well done on that particular measure. And this comes from Wallet Hub and the Idaho Business Review. If you wanted to see the article, it just came out this month. But yeah, I wanted to highlight those cities there in bold: Post Falls, Caldwell, Nampa, Coeur d'Alene, Moscow, and Meridian, making the rankings there as top businesses, some of them top 20 nationally to start a business. So I think that's noteworthy. So yeah, if there are any questions, this would be a great opportunity for either Kyle or myself to answer any questions you have about the content of today's webinar. Our contact information there as well for you if you want to make that request after the webinar. But happy to field those questions. Back to you, Lindsay.
Yeah, so it doesn't look like we have any questions right now. I didn't know if there was anything, Kyle, you want to add at all?
I'll just say, first of all, thank you again so much for having me. And if anyone needs assistance, whether you just have a business idea or you're seeking to grow your business or scale an already established business, we're here to assist. So again, please take advantage of our resources. And again, thank you both so much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
And thank you, Kyle. This was kind of a interesting time right after Memorial Day to do a webinar, but I appreciate the opportunity and you and availing yourself to do this with us. You as well, Lindsay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So it doesn't look like we have any questions, so I'm gonna go ahead and give some everyone time back, I suppose. So thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Just a quick plug for our next one. Our next one is scheduled for Tuesday, June 17th. Labor economists Sam Wolkenhauer, Lisa Grigg, and Brandon Young will talk about the second part of the Rural Profile Report regarding economics. To register for that webinar and others, please navigate to Labor's calendar of events. For more details, go to labor.idaho.gov. We would also like to remind you that the Idaho Department of Labor has many services geared to job seekers, employers, but also includes free access to labor market information available at lmi.idaho.gov. Thanks again for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Same to you.